Welcome back to the channel, Adventures Through Climate Change. I am Trevor Snyder, and we are here today watching a video that, normally I'm like, I have not seen this one yet. I have seen this one. Actually, I filmed this one yesterday in my days. So, probably about 5-6 days ago for you guys. And I did not have my mic set. Something happened, got turned off. I went to go watch it, just check it before I upload it. I don't do any editing to these videos. I have other channels that require editing. I don't have time for editing. This is strictly for conversation and community. Because these topics keep coming up. They keep coming up, and I want to know what's going on. So today, we are actually talking about, Peter Zeihan is talking about it is happening at the speed of light. I caught him on a recent JRE podcast and on Spotify there. And I just thought, man, this guy, interesting cat. He had a lot of takes on a lot of things. Sometimes when you have an opinion on everything and you're so a matter of fact, I don't know what to believe, like how much to believe, but it's interesting stuff. And I think he's right on a lot of this, a lot of the stuff that he was talking about on JRE. This is different. And, so let's get into it. Let's see what he has to say. I'm gonna have to mess with probably the volume. Okay, here we go.
Everything in the light.
Okay. First of all, he's saying everything in the light gray. And the reason I just wanted to pause it, because it took me a little bit, because it's just this light gray. I kept looking over at this like gray stuff, building power, and it's just up here, everything in the light gray he's talking about. So he starts that, everything in the light gray.
Gray on roughly the left half, that's liquid fuels. We use it for cars, we use it for transportation primarily. Everything in the white block on the right side, that's some sort of value-added product, whether it's asphalt for roads or industrial lubricants or petrochemicals. So roughly 3/5 of the total is liquid oil used for transport. Transport. That is by far the most important aspect of all things oil. We do not have a technology to replace that. So if we do move into a deglobalized world, anyone who cannot get the oil suddenly cannot move at scale. That is the future of our world. And that has to provide the baseline understanding when you're looking at a country's military capacity. Once you lose it, you do not get it back unless somebody decides to give it to you. The world before 19...
I don't mean to change it or stop it here, but we see it all the time with monopolies and that type of thing, where as soon as you let one company buy out all the others, it's very hard to gain any sort of foothold back into that environment. And this is kind of it, once somebody has a monopoly on all the oil and all that happening, and who's that going to be? We haven't been drilling on our stuff, but there's the United States. They've been doing stupid stuff with it lately and selling off a lot of things where, China actually has a big foothold in energy production, oil production, and natural gas. Anyways, I digress. Let's let him talk for a little bit. I apologize.
In 1945, the advanced countries were industrial. The non-advanced countries were not industrial. And so there was a very us versus them mentality when it came to wars. Either you had the oil, and so you had an empire and colonies, or you did not, and you were a colony. We're going back there. Because oil is also required for industrial transport. And if you remove oil access at the same time you start factoring in some very, very mild climate change, you get a very different picture. Now,
cheese factory?
Predicting climate change down to the city level is almost impossible, and I would argue that our math on that is absolutely awful. The best example I can offer is last summer when Portland became an easy bake oven at 120 degrees for several days.
I figured it out. This guy, and I don't know why is this talking like this? All right, we back? Okay, here we go. Oh man, I had the echo on. Hopefully this turns out in this first part. I'm not redoing this video. I apologize for anybody that had to watch this first part of the video with my mic all messed up. But I bet he's from Portland because that last factory looked like the Tillamook factory on the coast of Oregon. So this is all coming together. 122 degrees in Portland. Sorry, that's hotter than Vegas.
I mean, for a 2-week period, Portland, grungy, drizzly, cloudy Portland, became hotter than Las Vegas had ever been. There are plenty of predictions out there for the Houston becoming unlivable or Florida going underwater and deserts becoming bigger, but no one had predicted that the Pacific Northwest was going to be one of the early casualties of climate change. We're not that good. What we can do is look at the last century of weather data, not forecast, data, hard data, and we can see trend lines. The biggest concern I've got is within those trend lines, there's a sign that wind patterns from the equator to the pole are becoming more extreme, largely because land heats more quickly than water, and the poles are heating more quickly than the equator as well, or the equatorial oceans. And that generates more wind going from the equator out. And so you have to look towards the equator to see what you will get. In the case of the United States.
And that makes sense. We watched that in plenty of videos, but probably known that before. But wind is strictly air moving from high pressure to low pressure. And so usually pressure is indicative of, gravity. So, how far away you are from baseline, but also equator up, like when things are cold, they don't move as much, they compact, right? And when things are active and they're hot, when they're hot, they're active, and they expand, and that's what causes the wind. So obviously if you're going to change, or if the earth goes into any sort of changing in the cycle or what's going on, obviously it's going to change wind patterns. He's saying it's picking up and it's going from the equator up, and that's a big thing.
That means more tropical moisture coming in as storm systems. That may be coming as hurricanes. I'm not saying we're that good at the data, but we definitely know that we're getting more and more water in the Midwest, and that is allowing more and more farming. But if you move over to, say, the European and the Russian space, there's no tropical water south of them. And in fact, in the Russian wheat belt, there's desert between the wheat belt and the equator. So these areas are drying out. That suggests to me that we're going to have agricultural breakdowns in a lot of places, not just because of a problem with fertilizer, but because of a problem with climate. And it's hitting parts of the world harder. Now in the United States, if you're a farmer, you're going to make mad money on this. But if you're saying the Russian wheat belt, no. I don't think the Russians are in danger of dropping back into subsistence farming anytime soon, but we can certainly kiss a lot of their exports goodbye. This is just a couple of graphics I pulled from the new book that comes out in June. The dotted lines are what matters here. Dotted lines are when shale became the majority of American energy production, and you can see how radically it changed things. So on the top two, so on the left you've got coal, on the right you've got natural gas. Once natural gas was competing with coal in a very big way, that's the top left, production just dropped off. Hard to compete with free. And on the right, you can see where all that natural gas radically increased production, the blue line, and how it started pulling away from total consumption, the orange line, and we started becoming the world's second largest exporter of natural gas, most notably pipes to Mexico.
Produce more than you need.
A significant amount of LNG. We even have a couple pipes up into Canada, of all places now. The bottom right, same idea, but with crude. The blue is what used to be imports. The orange is exports, and you can see that a few years ago, the lines crossed. Now, we did have a quick recombining during COVID briefly, but those have already widened back. I just don't have good enough data because the United States Department of Energy reports data differently from everyone else. We don't report crude oil production. We report refinery production because
he's probably going to explain things a little bit more. But I worked in the energy field, the energy sector for a while in the oil fields in North Dakota. And we talked about this 15 years ago, how there was a lack of refineries. Most of the refineries were 100 plus years old. In fact, in the last like 4 years to date right now, I think we've only shut down 4. We haven't built any. And the reason being is because it takes on average about 15 years to pay them back. And it takes, 4 to 7 years to build one or something like that. So probably I think 6 years or something, 6 or 7 years to build one. So if you spend that amount of time and then they can't pay it back till after you're 20 plus years till it's paid back. Well, what's happening is people, and we've been constantly doing this, is we've demonized oil, right? Oil production, oil use. So these oil companies, they're like, why would we invest and build more refineries when you're saying in 15, 20 years, we're not going to have them and not going to do it at all? It's like, it's counterproductive for them because they're just trying to keep money in their pocket. It doesn't make sense to spend $40 billion, or however much it is to build a refinery, when you can get you're making your money anyways, right? It's because there's a political gain to be had in it, and that's the issue right there. We need to focus on more refineries in the United States. That's my 2 cents.
The eyes of the DOE, no one uses crude. People use refined product. I can see the logic, but nobody else does that. So it makes it an apples and oranges comparison, which is a real pain in the ass, and we have to wait for someone else to report American data in order to get something that's actually useful for comparison.
I'm sorry. That was arrogant of me to say like everybody else should change, because I do agree that the United States is stupid in a lot of things. Like we still use for our metric system, or rather than measuring system, we use a standard system rather than a metric system, which is absolutely horrible. Because if we just went with everybody else, it's a far better system and it works in tens. It's easier. It just makes more sense. But whatever, we're stuck in our ways, I guess.
Bottom line, shale good, Canada good too. The Canadians started in roughly 1980 to crack the code on something we now know as tar sands, or the oil sands. That's the orange output. That's entirely from Alberta, with maybe a little bit from Saskatchewan. The blue is their more conventional crude, and as you can see, the orange is now as big as the blue. Now, the Canadians have probably peaked out. They have had the same issues going on in their oil patch that everywhere else in the world, where people are like, oh, oil bad. And so investment is kind of flatline. So that 5.5 number, million barrels per day, that's about where they've been now for the last year and a half. I don't expect it to get very big, much bigger than that very soon. 3 to 8 years to bring a project online. That's just the world we're in. And they have nowhere to send it. You'll notice that all of the shale fields are between the Rockies and the Appalachians. And this is where Keystone was supposed to go. So the economic argument, especially in a world where the United States is restricting exports, the economic argument for Keystone is a little questionable, because they would be running a crude line into the most super saturated oil markets in the world in order to get it to Houston, where it could then be refined. So all of the value add is done in the United States, and American refineries will then be able to send that product wherever they want. But Albertan crude production has to compete with U.S. crude prices. And whereas the break-even price for American shale is now sub 50.
Would you look at that?
It's beautiful.
Sorry, guys, but we do love YouTube. It's gave us all a platform to be able to do stuff, and it looks like we're going to get 2 ads. The shale is a big thing. That's where the oil and the gas is trapped. It's a rock, and then they frack it, and they're able to pump it up. And we did a short video on that, and I think most of you guys thought it was pretty interesting.
It's above
Check that out.
70, and the economics for it don't make a huge amount of sense anymore. I think they missed their window on that, unfortunately. So it's going to be all U.S. shale all the time for the U.S. market. Love this graphic. Okay, there's a whole mess of things going on in here. First of all, the blue are fields or crude sources that I do not expect to be restricted in any meaningful way. And in the upper left-hand corner, the ones that have the slash through them, those are the U.S. major shale projects. Overall, this is talking about crude quality. So if you're in the upper left, you're talking light crude, sweet crude, which is a way of saying it has almost no contaminants. And it's usually the color and consistency of nail polish remover. It's very easy to refine, and historically speaking, that crude has sold at a significant premium to other crude grades. If you move to the bottom right, that's heavier crude, lots of contaminants, and usually that's the thick, gooey stuff that we normally think of when we think of crude oil. Here on the right, it has few contaminants, but it's still pretty thin. If you're on the bottom left, it doesn't have very many contaminants, but it's fairly thick. This matrix is how every refinery in the world has to plan. Most refineries can only run a very specific type of crude, sometimes from a specific oil field. The chemical composition of all the crudes is very different place to place. Now, with the world I anticipate, where we're going to have a lot more military confrontations in a lot more places, Ukraine war is just the first of many. Anything in blue is fine. Anything in green is probably fine. But by the time you get to the oranges, and especially the reds, we should not count on that crude getting out in large volumes on a regular basis. Give you an idea of where we are, Urals is right now orange. We'll see if that holds, because I anticipate at some point the European coalition is probably going to break and allow some more Urals to get out, allowing the Russians to at least export half of what they've got. But this is the sort of thing that when I put this in front of a bunch of refinery, we really hope, when I put this when I put this chart in front of refiner operators, where they have to run their entire business plan on what type of crude they can get, they really have to schedule those events on the ground floor, because this will make some of them borderline suicidal. You're talking about billion-dollar investments they have made in order to run a very specific crude grade. And for half of them, what they have hoped for is simply going to go away. Now, you can retool your refineries to run a different grade, but then you're running that grade, and you're just as vulnerable, but to a different input source.
Right.
The bigger your system, the more crude grades you can access. The more you can blend two things to get something that's more approximate to what you need, the better you're going to be. The United States doesn't do a lot of that right now, but we're going to be getting into it in a very big way once we have that export ban, because then we're going to have a lot of light sweet in the neighborhood because of shale, and we're still going to have a fair amount of heavy sour because of the Canadians, and we're going to be able to muddle through. And we're going to be able to muddle through in an environment of a super saturated crude market. That'll keep prices more accessible. But if you move over into, say, East Asia, you're lucky to get whatever you can get. And you're going to have to run it through your refinery and do a lot of repairs, because it will trigger a lot of damage. And then you're going to have something called run loss, which is just what it sounds like. You can't get 100% of the crude to give you product. You probably only get like 80 to 90%. And that's 10 to 20% of the total output that you have just burned into nothing and is wasted. And in a high price environment, that's just crippling. I have always seen three big wars coming as deglobalization kicks in. The Ukraine war is start of that one. The next one.
Did he just say deglobalization? I think that is a big thing. I think as resources get more scarce, as people or countries have monopolies on things, that stuff does tend to happen where, the people that are all for globalization are usually the ones that need something from other people. The ones that have everything are usually like, I'm good in my country, right? I mean, we're notorious in the United States for that, but I think our bigger problem is exploiting others, right? Terrible. The things that the United States has done in the past to get an economic leg up is distasteful at least, right? At least, at best, it's, so I digress. I just thought that was interesting.
Shocker involves the Middle East. Without the United States there saying what's what, we are going to have a fight between the Iranians and the Saudis over who's in charge. The Abqaiq facility is the largest single oil field on the planet and is responsible for half of Saudi output. Unfortunately for the Saudis, who are Sunni Arabs, Shia live in the vicinity of Abqaiq, as well as in the vicinity of all the offloading facilities to get things onto the tankers. Iran has a very similar problem. Their oil all comes from Khuzestan, and Khuzestan is the only province that they have that is not populated by Persians, but instead is populated by Arabs. So there are fifth columns in the millions living on top of all of the energy assets for both. And to think in a post-American world where these two are going at each other, that this is going to continue stably, I think is more hopeful than I am capable of being. There is one aspect to consider that is kind of funky. Right here, we've got the bypass pipelines.
I was going to mention that these green things are pipelines. I've seen this before because I can't remember, one of them was getting cut off because of the other one. They were talking about making it longer and basically almost cutting the other one off. And I think a lot of it had to do with the way Iran was situated. But
UAE to the Gulf of Oman, and one from the fields in eastern Saudi Arabia to the offloading facilities in western Saudi Arabia on the Red Sea. Iran doesn't have a bypass pipeline. So when we do get to the point that there's a fight here, the Iranians have always said their entire game plan is we will close the straits. That's always been a threat at us. We have maintained the global order, and we have made sure we can get the oil out of the Persian Gulf to everyone as a understanding for the globalized system. You get to expand economically if we get to write the security policies. But we're not here anymore. And so if the Iranians try to shut the Gulf, the Saudis will help because they can still get 5 million barrels a day out, but the Iranians can't. So we're now in a situation where both of the major powers believe they have a vested interest in shutting down oil trade. I thought China was rough before. Just wait till that happens.
Things get rough when oh wait, I'm not subscribed with that. When it comes down to fighting over resources. I mean, you see that we saw that during the lockdowns where people were going nuts over toilet paper. I mean, we'd put up scenes where people are stealing toilet paper from it's ridiculous. And that was toilet paper. What happens when you have a food shortage? What happens when you have an oil shortage? What happens when you have like real shortages? I mean, that's just like, people are selfish, you know. I just it's crazy. I thought he said something interesting at the end that I just wanted to bring a point to, because he basically said, you know, we provide the securities and you know, blah blah blah, we'll make a deal. That's how the United States has exploited so many countries. It's like, hey, listen, we'll be your bodyguard. We'll make sure nobody picks on you, but we want a piece of the cut. You know, it's like thugs on the block, you know. It's like how the mafia used to run. It's crazy. And then they're like, well, we're not in those areas anymore. No, we've been pulling out of them because we do not have a right to demand anything from those people. And yes, they probably have issues of their own and their own problems with government. And I wish and pray that everyone can just have better lives, but it's not how it works. And the United States makes things worse because they exploit things. They make it possible for those dictatorships to actually keep hold on the people, right? All because we want to negotiate with these creeps. So anyways, that's my 2 cents. I thought the video was awesome. I'm going to watch another one of his. And I don't know if I can actually do the one I really wanted to, because it's on the full version of his interview on the Joe Rogan podcast, and that's on Spotify. And I don't know if I'm legally allowed to do that on critique something on Spotify. And I mean, basically, it's a breakdown. We're doing breakdowns of what people are talking about, and so I want you guys to, if you like, you know, what I'm saying, I would appreciate a subscription. But obviously, these guys are doing the work. Zeihan, Geopolitics, that's Peter's YouTube channel. So he's the important guy. We're watching his videos. I just really wanted to put things together for a community aspect, to be able to talk about things, because left and right, I mean, it goes back and forth, right? So with that being said, like I said, if I've earned your subscription, please, I wouldn't mind notifications, whatever. If you dislike it, I totally understand that too. And I hope to get a comment from you so that I have something to reply to. But other than that, we'll catch you on the next video.